It's a great city.
Right, everyone. So we are going to segue into our next session. And the session is about trauma and triggers. And as I begin the session, I want to give great gratitude to my co-presenters here, my co-discussion folks here, Zoe Moore and Lynnette Phillips. So what I'll do is first, again, welcome everyone to the Travel Unity session about triggers and trauma. It is a session that is really important, and we really wanted to make sure that we made space for this discussion. It's also a discussion that we hope more discussion takes place around, and that's why we wanted to have it. So my name is Sophia Hyder Hock, and I am part of this session. I'm a board member with Travel Unity, and I also do a lot of work in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space for travel organizations. I am a yoga instructor and a meditation instructor as well, and that's a really important part of who I am and the work that I do. With that, I don't want to take up too much time, and I would love to have Zoe Moore introduce herself.
Hey, greetings. Thank you everyone for being here. My real name is Shariga. Zoe is a nickname that I go by, so you'll see both names on LinkedIn. I am a hospitality, equity, diversity, and inclusion strategic consultant. And what that means is I just help hospitality organizations really develop their EDI strategies, from insight, which is the collection of data, to implementation of strategies, so that we can start truly moving the needle and look at the importance of representation in leadership, supplier diversity, and professional development and education around these topics, so that we can make destinations more desirable, events more inclusive, and this, that, and the third. So the name of my company is Moore Consulting Agency. I do business as Grow with Zomo, as a way to encourage people, empower people, that this journey of learning is just that. It's a process, and it starts from the seeds to the nurturing, and we're all, like they discussed in the previous session, curious to learn. So that's me. And I suppose you want me to pass it over to Lynnette, my clubhouse friend.
Hello, it's good morning, afternoon, evening. Thank you for all who have joined. My name is Lynnette Phillips, and I am a former hospitality manager from the happiest place on earth, known as Walt Disney World. That was a 17-year career until about last year. And but my journey into hospitality started at a very young age. I grew up around a family with a soul food restaurant that we all worked in it. We all contributed. We all did our part, and of course took care of people through good old soul food here in Florida. And then I now work as a leadership coach and consultant with my own company, Empower Your Possibilities. And I integrate mindfulness and the neuroscience behind how we think, feel, and behave, right? What we think, what we feel, what we do, and how do you do that as a leader and be more effective, but while also reducing stress. I think that that's the important part, right? When we talk about things like speaking up, it's going to create some natural stress on our body when we think about things like intervening or being challenged in certain areas, but we can do it. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much for being here. So as we set the stage for this session, I would love for us to just take a moment, if you are joining in for the first time, or if you're continuing to stay with us. We're just going to have a little bit of a pause, a reflect, like I like to call a bit of a meditation session, maybe a minute, just so we can give ourselves a space to be. So if you're not already there, please come to a place where you are seated, standing, whatever feels right for you. And from here, if it feels comfortable, one time, we will be closing our eyes if that feels good, or you could just have a soft gaze, whatever feels right for you in the moment. Just take a little time to ground. So feeling all four corners of your feet on the ground, maybe your seat on the chair. Let's see how that feels. And from here, we'll take 3 big deep breaths, inhaling and exhaling, just letting go. Inhale and exhale. One more big inhale in. Exhaling and release. Just resetting and creating space for yourself, for this conversation. And to just be open to receiving any feelings, thoughts, emotions that may come up as a part of growth. So wherever you are, even if you are not on screen, which is fine, we're going to dive in, and you can open your eyes as we get ready to
This is stupid.
have this conversation. All right. A reset. I needed that bit of a reset myself. So, as we understand and we talk about triggers and trauma in the space of travel, the world of travel, I really want to bring up a fact that I think we know exists, but maybe we haven't really thought about. And it is COVID. We think about the workforce. We think about all these different challenges that the travel industry is facing with all the issues that have come up, but also, in the diversity, equity, inclusion space. And when we think about triggers and trauma and COVID, I want to remind us all that in the US, 700,000 people have passed away. And that is a large number, period. That's a large number. Even, one person it's a big deal. So if we think about COVID, and we think about the people that we've lost, and then we also think about the shortage in a workforce in the industry. That's one thing to just conceptually remember. If we think about triggers and trauma from a workforce perspective, from a professional standpoint, those that are seeking to hire, if we think about it from a visitorship perspective, perhaps when you go to a restaurant and they're short-staffed, and we think about a community healing perspective, we're holding, maybe with being aware of it or not, we're holding on to a lot of stress, a lot of trauma, regardless of our backgrounds, right? We all have different levels of it. So I think it's important to acknowledge just that right there. From a trauma and triggering perspective for staff, I think a lot about there's so many different ways to call staff, right? There's an office setting, there's the restaurant setting, there's a hotel setting, of where we have a lot going on in our personal lives as we try to figure out, how to manage COVID, if we have kids and timelines and responsibilities, all these responsibilities that we bring with us to work that may not have us be our best selves, but we're trying to get there. even if it's that 1%. I deal with that quite a bit myself. How do we do both? How do we bring trauma? How do we heal? How do we work towards being our best self? I think about this a lot. And I'm going to pause there because I want to use one lens first to explore that and to hear any perspectives that you have from a staff and employee perspective.
Yeah,
So-
I can definitely I would call myself an open book, right? So vulnerability for me has been a resource. I come from the lens of being the patient and getting therapy after being in the Army for 12 years, right? And so the trauma and the background of that, and then now, how am I dealing with COVID, or how would I recommend staff deal in this space, comes from what I learned about mindfulness and how it's helped me, overcome PTSD or manage PTSD. And so I use those resources and share that, it is that moment to self-reflect. It has a lot to see and journal what you're going through and how you engage in different settings, and being able to identify when you need to take a break. And then something also that you mentioned, that as you're self-reflecting, and that's that bridgeway into being empathetic, is when you look around and you see people who are handling everything that's going on differently, can you empathize, right? And that project may be due, but there are all these other elements going around. And so being able to self-reflect and have social awareness of what everyone else is going through puts you in a place where, and I think what that meditation exercise does at the beginning, and as we should move through society or in our public settings, is sometimes taking a moment to pause is moving forward. That by taking that deep breath, allowing yourself to reset when you feel flustered, when you see someone else is flustered, is that you can pause and be like, it's not about me. They're not attacking me, or, they too are going through a lot of different things. So yeah, I would say mindfulness definitely helped me, and is a resource that I rely on now to engage everywhere.
Thank you. So Lynnette, what are your thoughts on, from a staff perspective as well? Like what can be done, what to bring yourself best self to work, but also to work through, triggers and trauma?
Well, I definitely think from the staff perspective, because there's one piece that there are individuals that have been kind of overworked in this. They haven't had necessarily that break. There are some staff members who had to go get a job because maybe their hotel closed, their restaurant closed. It was beloved, and it was something that they identified with, and it was such a key piece of them, but they had to take care of their family. I know individuals who have, stepped away from organizations that they love to get a job. And then it was like, well, they called me back. I don't know if I'm going to go back. So I think we're just at the beginning of what are those impacts to even be seen. And for a lot of staff, it's really, I think, important to, I think, still get in their stability mode, right? Which is what allows us in these next, give people not what has to happen in 2 years from now. What does the next month look like? Kind of, what is the next 3 months? Are we going to be onboarding a lot of folks? What type of environment are they coming in? Am I relying on like my highest engaged, like you said, the engaged trainer that's literally, goes in their car in the parking lot and cries? So I do think from a leadership standpoint right now, you have to look people in the eye. You have to create a truly emotional and mental space where someone can say, today's a really hard day for me, or this week has been a hard week, and that I may have to pull back from something that you even expect from me a little bit. We can't all fire on 100% cylinders every single day. I think, is your 80% 100% of what you can give me today? And those at times is not necessarily being a weakness or being a reprieve or not showing that you don't aren't highly engaged in your work. I think often at times it is a check-in. And it's almost like when you use that word baggage, it's a means to look at what's carrying weight with me today.
Mm-hmm.
What's coming into this space and place with me today.
And so what I'm hearing is having a space, from a corporate standpoint, or whatever professional space there is, to have conversations to allow to recognize that, again, we're human and a lot has happened. So really it's acknowledging that a lot has happened, and how can we kind of peel back the layers to be human? How can we support each other? How can we allow for that space of helping yourself be your best self by actually being your best self, the good and the bad?
Yeah, we shy away from the negative emotions, not understanding that they are indicators and often a learning point, because there's something there. None of us completely live in a high existence of state of joy all the time. Now, you can have joy in the midst of a sorrowful type of experience or challenging area of like, hey, I'm so grateful for a ton of things, but I do think there's a way to look at almost like a summit, right? What side of the summit, am I on? Am I a little bit more challenging trek, or man, this hike and this path is a little bit more easy and scenic and doing certain things. And everybody's going to be looking at the summit differently, whether they're at the base, some are at the top. And as a workforce, I think definitely, it's going back to the identities right now. Mothers and parents and caretakers, because I can't just say that it's mothers. There are single fathers out there. There are grandparents. Children may have lost a parent in COVID, and now you have second generation. You have grandparents, aunts, others who are raising them and coming together as a community. And those are your staff members as well. So what is the experience of like in the workplace, and do they feel supported? And do we now have a lot of the systems to welcome these individuals and help them know that there is a place for them in the workplace?
Absolutely. As you mentioned that, what really struck me is a simple question, but something that can be so loaded is, how are you doing today?
Mm-hmm.
And I find that question, we ask it all the time, but we don't really take the time to listen to how the person is really doing. And then the person that answers it doesn't really want to say what they're doing, but you can hear it that they're not doing so well, but I'm going to say it's okay, so we can just move on.
Yeah. I'm going to describe a behavior and even more and elaborate on how we ask, how are you? We often do it as we're walking past somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, how are you? It's an extension of hey or hi. And it was one of my international hospitality students when I was at Disney. She was from China, and she pointed it out. She said, do you ever notice here that everyone says, hey, how are you, as they're walking past you? And she would stop people and like stand in front of them. And she would say, well, I am, since you asked me. And it was interesting how over time, just our little department responded differently, because she pointed out something that we just subconsciously all did. Like everyone does it. Hey, how are you? How are you? But then it really began, if you're going to ask the question with the intention, you should stop. Your body language you should be looking at the person. And so it began to be something of huge value for me, of like, hey, am I going to actually ask that question and invest in the, hey, how are you? And also that it's okay to just say hello to someone or good afternoon. Like she never said what you're doing is wrong. She just said, I think there's a better way to ask of others and get the response that you're looking for if you're really interested in how I am. And I thought that was really, really cool.
I think that speaks to the culture of an organization, right? The behaviors and how you show up in a space, and then the energy that you create when you're there, so that others can, replicate that same, behavior. I like that when you stop and you actually make eye contact with someone when you say, how are you doing? To really, because communication is not just vocal or verbal, it's the body language. And you can tell a lot when you actually see someone. You know, when we talk about intimate conversations or intimacy, you know, I've broken it down. You know, I used to do spoken words. So we always take words and dissect them, but it's into me see, right? Like, so when you say hi to me, when we want to truly engage in a conversation, do you see me? And so when you ask somebody, you know, how are you doing? By looking at their body language and their face, and you can choose at that point if you're going to say, hey, you know, I have a moment, do you need to talk, you know, or hey, do you want to talk later, and giving them, extending that opportunity to be real with you, because that is that moment where they realize that you see them, you know. And that exchange right there, that energy gives way to a culture where people can thrive versus, you know, acting like we're all robots, you know, because that we are not. Like you mentioned earlier about operating on 100% cylinders. I don't recommend it at all. And that's the environment that I came from in the military. And what was happening is I was that leader who would, you know, show up sharp, you know, boots shine, uniform pressed, and I would go full throttle, and then I would go in my car and cry. And, you know, there was a fellow soldier who we were on, you know, a run together, and I thought all was well. We were all, you know, laughing, giggling, and the next week he committed suicide, and I had no idea, no idea. And we're in this memorial service, and you know, there's a lot of people just like, oh, well, he should have told somebody, he should have told somebody. And I raised my hand and I said, that could have been me, you know. And then at that point is when I started to get help, because I realized that I was bearing everything that I had been through, that I was going through. And that's what led to my honorable discharge, because I was breaking down inside, and I was going full throttle all the time and never in dealing with what I was going through. And there were so many soldiers doing the same. And so, yeah, I think it's that culture of an organization, you know, that we have to be aware of. That self-reflection is a tool that we use to then help others do the same.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you for sharing that. I know that wasn't easy, and I think it's hopefully an inspiration when people hear to ask for help, and to try to connect and be there for each other, to empathize, not assume. Those are some things that I've taken away from listening to you. And something else, you know, that I've done, you know, if we're talking about the how are you, is when I hear the I'm okay, and you again going back to the body language and all that, I usually ask, how are you really doing? There's a follow-up that shows that I care. I asked you for a reason. And it can cultivate connection. It can cultivate that space for trust, especially within an organization, so we aren't robots. So if we think about, you know, what our conversation of, you know, professionalism, staff, cultivating that workplace, if we use a different lens of being a visitor, I think about, honestly, I keep thinking about going to a restaurant and it's short staffed, and you have, as a visitor, an expectation that I'm going through so much right now, I just need a break. I'm going to go to a restaurant because I want someone to, you know, serve me food. And then the person that is the server is short staffed. There's a lot that's happening on that end too. And there's on both sides, it's a simple situation of just ordering food, getting it served, but it's a lot more than that. What are your thoughts on both situations, on, you know, the visitor and what they're bringing in, and treatment and empathy, and on the other side of, you know, that server that's dealing with all of that and empathy and communication?
Yeah, so I think what you're describing really is the rational and the irrational components of an engagement, right, or an interaction, as it comes to travel. You know, if I go and I get coffee, I have my choice. I can have it hot, and if I want hot, I want a nice hot cup of coffee. If I want it cold, I want it nice, enough ice. But those are kind of the just assumed rational components. But when we get into kind of these irrational, more connects with my feelings, Why do you think Starbucks writes your name on the cup so that you can hear your name when it's called? One, it helps them give you the right order, but two, that's one of the most recognizable things that gives us this like quick dopamine boost of connection. Like we actually physically respond to hearing our name called, especially if it's called in like a fun, engaging manner, and then we're getting this pumpkin latte. It's an enjoyable experience. And then I'm going to keep coming back for this $4 to $6 cup of coffee. So they've combined rational and irrational components. I think the same is to be said in lodging. When we really start to see families travel again, I think a family reunion dynamic will be something that we won't even know what it will look like. Before I know a lot of great families that plan amazing family reunions, but now there's critical members that have missing as a result of COVID or impacted or financially may not be able to come. And so as a staff, there's this rational component of they're going to come and they're going to get rooms and they're going to eat together and they're going to have big meals. But there's this irrational component of we're holding space for them to heal, for them to move forward, for them to identify, for them to physically connect, for them to emotionally connect. There's going to be laughter, there's going to be tears, there's going to be joy, there might be family fights. It's going to be all of those things that come in together into this space. And so how do you, it might be something as simple as, can you get this on the menu? And you think, why are they making this such a big deal? It could really be a big deal. Or, hey, waiving guidelines that sometimes may we bring in our own desserts. And normally we don't bring external food and liabilities and different things, but it may be we want grandma's pound cake. Like we need to find wherever we're going to serve it. And just having, people will share the why with you as to what they're looking for in those things, in those interactions, when you can help kind of disarm and there's not this barrier and their brain shares with them, this is a safe space. This is a person that's going to care. And this is a person that's, going to connect. So, as we think about the travel industry, that purposeful reason as to why is this person standing in my lobby? Why is this person coming into this restaurant? Basic needs, it might be they're just hungry. But the other piece may be, I am a, mother working from home and my house is a mess. I have not cleaned it up yet. And I've been cooking 3 meals a day because these kids are here with me and we're not fully back in school. And I just need to take a break from that. And even if they're understaffed, they can, greet them and say, we're so happy to help you. We're so happy that you're here. And it's this mutual exchange of like, hey, we're all going through. I think that to me is important.
Yeah, I'm usually the comic relief in a lot of these settings as a visitor. I think, again, self-reflection, right? I remember when I used to work at Starbucks. You mentioned that as an example. I remember when I was a server at Hyatt. And so who am I as a visitor to walk in and demand that someone be of service to me in a way that they're lesser than, right? Because I once was in that role. So reflecting on how I felt, when I was engaging different guests has helped me also build out frameworks that I use to train, different clients, whether it be hotels or staffs at events. You have to reflect on what that exchange, right, really, what it feels like. And I think we also have to reframe how we look at hospitality. If we understand, again, analyzing, critically thinking about the history of hospitality and how it was positioned where those were in service to people versus what hospitality is for. It's leisure and recreation. And for all the reasons that you mentioned, Lynnette, about why people want to go on vacation or why they go to a restaurant or sit at that bar, like, I'm dating myself, like the show Cheers, right? For community, right? Why are people here? And then as far as being the comic relief, usually when I have a server approach my table, I'll let them know that I relate to them. Oh, girl, ooh, hey, you, I remember I was a server. So what's your favorite thing on the menu? That kind of thing, to make sure they understand that I am them. We are, oh, you look flustered. Why don't you have a seat? I'm gonna order you a drink too. And that brings down the walls where they're like, this person sees me. Again, they see me as a person and not somebody who is waiting on me hand and foot, and I'm going to treat you any way I wish to. So that's a behavior and a mindset that I believe we need to shift in our industry. Because when we train our staff, we kind of train them to believe that the customer is always right. And I challenge that. right? There is bad behavior and there is zero tolerance for bad behavior. So not only do we need to train our staff on how to properly handle a guest that is, acting out of, out of our policies, but also train guests that when you come into this space, this is a mutual exchange between human beings. Like you don't get to treat somebody poorly because you're in a position where you're paying us money. Your money isn't more valuable than the respect within our organization. So yeah, I think that's the start, with being a visitor or visitorship.
I think for me, when I think about, from a visitor lens, if I'm going to a restaurant or even a hotel, I think what would be helpful is having, I mean, I like notes, I like signs. So a sign that says, please be patient. We're understaffed. We're trying our best. You're something that preempts the person or the family, the group that's coming in to say, okay, I think I should check, kind of like that check-in, like, okay, I need to remind myself or understand that. Because I also think that while the issue exists, no one really thinks about that when we're walking into a place. No one really actively thinks about it. So having that reminder of, hey, we're short staffed. Can you, please have a little empathy? And then that could hopefully set the stage of a greater connection. And so that's something that I think about as well. But I want to provide some space to talk about the neuroscience behind, triggers and trauma. So Lynnette, you've mentioned before about, flight or flight response, the neuroscience behind the brain. If you want to elaborate a little more on that, I'm sure
I'll share some today. And I have my little friend. My daughter loves it. She's like, can I play with the brain? She loves to. So, as we've talked about this, and if you refer to the previous session, we said a lot. And when we think about this, or, even today, taking that time, holding space, a lot of it is in this powerful muscle. And Ronnie even asked the question that I'll get to in this explanation about what happens if people haven't had these memories or these experiences, right? So let's just do a quick kind of overview of our brain. So at this base level, right, this is that basic survival that we've talked about, kind of where fight or flight can live in the base of our brain. It's our reptilian brain, oldest part of it. It basically wants to eat, sleep. Quite frankly, we're all adults, reproduce, have connection, but it also is responsible for being connected to like our heart and our gut. So if you walk into a place or you've eaten something, you're like, man, that's not like my butt. Like that's literally your brain connecting there from the basic level, right? Because you typically don't want to feel well, not feel well afterwards and other things like that. So once our basic needs are kind of taken care of, I have a roof over my head, food it's providing, different things. So when we think about that, that's our base level. And then I'm going to open this up for you. So then there is our midbrain, which that's the emotional epicenter. That's where a lot of those irrational components of service can come from. People's ability to smile or have care and concern for communicating to the customer or, a guest that, hey, we are working towards, and their behavior matches up with what the sign says, right? If people are giving pleasant service, even in being understaffed, it tells a story to our brain. Our brain connects that and can embed that memory and go, oh my gosh, yes, they're doing what they say they're doing, ultimately from that standpoint. So we have our midbrain here. It has our hypothalamus. It's responsible for our hormonal response to things. So when we are challenged in things like our fight or flight, or we're in a speak up mode and our heart's beating faster and all of a sudden adrenaline is going through our body, that is controlled there. Our body's actually responding, and it houses our natural security guard, our amygdala, who spends its time kind of scanning life's experiences for us and says, is this an issue? Should I be concerned? Do I need to enact this response? And one thing to think about is if we're conditioned to constantly see a ton of things as a flight risk or a actual response or, a reaction, you actually flood your body with more glucose naturally. You start to do that because guess what? If I'm going to escape, I need more sugar. I need more energy, your body's natural glucose. So a lot of times when it's like, man, where's this anxiety coming from? You have it naturally happening within your body. But then we have our actual logical brain, which a lot of what we talk about when we're thinking, who are we becoming? How do we apply these principles we talked about today? How can I get more comfortable speaking up? We naturally think is going to be in our logical frontal lobe of our brain, right? That's where knowledge lives. I've been told I can do this. But what happens is this midbrain is much, much bigger and it's much more powerful. And it drives our ability to apply the knowledge we have. So I'm going to ask a question and you can drop it in the chat. If you were to think about given 1 second, we have to measure it as 1 second because the actual imaging that has been done on our brain, because really it's more like a nanosecond, but who can quantify that? If I were to ask you how many neurons you think the frontal lobe, our logical thinking brain, can fire off in 1 second, what do you think it would be? All right, I hear 30,000, 1 million. Now our brain is a supercomputer. It is by, imaging the range of 10 to 100 neurons, but don't dismiss that. Like that's literally like 10 to 100 powerful iPads and their processing power. So when we're thinking about analyzing, doing something, we can actually do that at that level. Now, what do you think about the midbrain? If they're sending a signal out, how many neurons per second do you think is happening in the midbrain? Now I hear billions. Don't we all, right? We're up there with those people getting to space, right? Billions. It has been estimated, because again, the imaging is not perfect, anywhere from 4 to 6 billion neurons can fire from our emotional epicenter. And it's basically a path. So you know what else lives in our midbrain? Things underneath the surface that neither I can see of Zoe can't see from me. It comes through relationship. It's things like our beliefs, our values, our memories. So back to Ronnie's question, right? If someone who hasn't experienced that, you've got to do the deep work with an individual who hasn't experienced empathetic service. So if you have an individual and going through the hiring process and bringing them on, and they themselves haven't stayed in a luxury environment, they themselves haven't been the recipient, or they see themselves as just a servant, not a catalyst or a gateway to an amazing experience, that's at the belief level, how they are possibly going to send an experience or a thought or a feeling in their brain, and it will impact what you do. Because ultimately, how those neurons are interacting way beneath the surface that we can't see is what then institutes our behaviors. So for leaders, it's really, really important to understand, what's your beliefs about our industry? What do you know? What guides you? And it can be very different. We're not there to judge those things. Zoe brought up the word respect. What does respect look like? That's why you can ask questions like that. What does this travel season look like for individuals? In painting that picture and really getting the imagery, it helps people to understand how does my brain see it? When we started off the session today with the meditation, I thought, I want this at every flight. Like, we should have an in-flight meditation, because air travel is one of the most stressful experiences. At this point, staff are got to be on edge, right? We see incidences where people are attacking staff, which is completely inappropriate. But we often see it. We see the mom who's like, is my baby going to cry or not going to cry? We see people who are like, I don't like to fly at all together. We see the families who can't get seats together. It's a stressful experience. And we put you in a box and say, fly thousands of miles across the ocean together. But then we try to create an in-flight experience so that you can disarm all those things that are happening within the brain that making you, want to react on that, make you want to be anxious, make you want to be frustrated, make you want to do all those things. And guess what? That emotional epicenter, that midbrain, is firing off messages, and it's guided by our beliefs and our values. If I believe this is going to be a bad flight, it might actually be, because I'm paying more attention to those things. There's one really cool thing about our brain. It actually can't hold all the information around us. It has to do 3 things with it. It's either going to delete it, meaning like, I don't have any use for that. it's going to kind of go through this filtering process. It's going to delete it. It's going to store it. It's actually going to say, I want to hold on to this. I want to keep this as a memory. I want it to encode. I had a reaction to this. Or it may do something even beyond the storing it. It may distort it. It's going to amplify it, even more. I think when we talked about, those microaggression pieces, for some, it could be a distortion of even that experience, because it's like, I keep going through the same situation over and over again, right? So we have to be thinking about the power of the brain and what's actually going on with us as we're servicing someone, but also someone who's the recipient of our service, because their brain's processing very similarly to ours, but they're guided by different beliefs, different values, different purposeful reasons as to why they are engaging in that experience. And we just kind of have to learn that we're walking, talking, emotional beings interacting with each other.
Mm-hmm. It's always fascinating to me. Absolutely fascinating. I think, it's what everything you've said resonates, because I've studied neuroscience as a part of, with yoga and meditation, and the importance of understanding just how our brain operates. And so, and perhaps this is a bias I have, but what I do to help me understand and get through triggers, trauma, anything that I'm aware of, is really my breath. I always try to come back to, okay, Sophia, take a deep breath, just pause. You brought up the being in an airplane, and I travel quite a bit, or I was before COVID. The one thing that I get very anxious about is I cannot sit in a window seat anymore. It always has to be an aisle seat, because of an experience that I had years ago when I was given the last seat, the back of the plane without a window. And it brought up so much for me that I just can't do it anymore. And so it's really interesting, thinking about what can trigger people, the different types of trauma that is. And then it's already a stressful situation. You don't know what people are dealing with, working through, because people are different. So what are some ways you also think, when we're kind of in that type of situation, that what can people do to help reduce that levels of stress, of triggering, what have you?
You have to, I recommend, and this is something that I've had to do. I often try to say, let me disrupt the story I'm telling myself, because our brain also operates on wanting to know what's going to happen. You can't just leave it hanging. No one, I think I use this example. No one watches a movie and cuts it off for the last 5 minutes and says, okay, I'm good with that. Right? Can you, like, we use your, like, when the power goes out or something like that, like, your brain has to know what happens. And as we're in these experiences and we're living these experiences, so a lot of times you almost have to disrupt the pattern, and you have to then take, I would say, seemingly check in. The first check-in is what am I feeling? And as a result of what am I feeling, what am I thinking? We often think about it backwards. I use the example a lot of times that I'm guided by kindness is one of my top core values. And so when my kids are not kind to each other, I then find myself raising my voice and saying, be kind to each other. And that obviously didn't work. So a lot of times I identified, okay, that trigger is their lack of kindness. I would say, can everyone just find a quiet activity by themselves? Because what I want them to do is miss each other. I need to get on the other end of what's the behavior or the experience I want. And then let's try to guide that. It's very similar when you can disrupt the, I think, kind of muddled thinking, and you're not quite sure what you're thinking, but you're feeling something. Why not start with, what am I feeling? Okay, I'm feeling nervous because this person is yelling at me, right? I don't like them yelling at me because it violates my value of respect. This can all be happening still too, as you then go, so my next step is, I'm going to politely ask them, and invite them, say, I invite you to have a conversation with me, but I do not believe you need to yell at me. Sometimes just something like that. It's either going to trigger that person, and who do you think you're going to tell me? But it's going to make them think at times, right? I think back to my time at Disney. I always had this little phrase with my team. I said, look, we don't do scenes in a lobby. Like, save that for a movie set. Invite someone to an office just to ask them that question, because now they have a decision point. And my office usually sat right off of the front desk, especially when I was at the Grand Floridian. And I would say, may I invite you into my office to have the conversation? And then I would even tell them why. Hey, I'm inviting you into my office because I think it gives you an opportunity to express to me, but it also when somebody's just checking into that hotel and they see someone screaming in the lobby, they're thinking, what am I walking into? Am I going to have to be doing the same thing to get what I want? So, it's a lot about going back to those like 5 steps that you said. It's very similar in supporting kind of speaking up. It's like helping people disengage with whatever story they're drafting in their mind right now, because they can actually choose their own adventure along the way if they're more conscious, because they're going to revert back to, oh, I know I only yell at people to get what I want in a service-based experience because these people aren't going to take me for a run for my money. I've worked too hard for it. You kind of have to disrupt that and say, I see you, I hear you, I acknowledge you, I'm here to provide you a solution. And it starts with you first. What am I feeling? And as a result of what I'm feeling, what am I thinking?
Thank you. Thank you. I'm always learning. I'm always learning.
It's
So how about you?
interesting. You can hear, if you're, tuned in to Lynnette as she mentioned certain words, it's definitely, I can feel that Walt Disney experience, right? It's like, choose your adventure along the way. I'm like, I feel like a kid again. Like, what does that mean for me to be in this position, of deciding what that adventure is going to look like? And then there's another thing you said that, does a server, do they see themselves as being the catalyst or gateway to an amazing experience? And that, for me, I hear that going back to Ronnie's question about, how do we help someone who hasn't ever been a server? How do we help them? Is, you again, reframing, looking at that person who is your server, your waitress, your waiter. This person is the gateway to my amazing experience. This person is the guide of my adventure. So do I want to give them negative energy because they're preparing my food, they're preparing my drink, they're helping me have this experience that I want to have, so that they can see that this is a mutual experience. So I love that energy that you keep saying, and the way that you speak, Lynnette, and I know that training is embedded in you, and I think that's what we need to do with training our staff, so that visitors, again, know how to have that mutual adventure, if you would.
And I would even challenge to say that visitors often take their cues, right? Because you're the trusted advisor. You gave the example where you said, I like to ask, what is your favorite thing on the menu? What's your recommendation? And you see people's face light up, because it's like, you actually care about my opinion. And it's more that you're going to be bringing me more drink or doing other things. And so, the role is, you have to remember, going into these experiences, at a base level, you're providing for a basic need. If you're lodging, you're providing the actual shelter, because where else are they going to stay if they're coming to that city? And people, even if they have family, some people still choose now to stay in hotels because they want to treat themselves to that experience. Or on a base level, you're providing them food, or even think down to the amenities. I think about cruise vacations, and the fact that they get it right, which is, we got to have these club kids experiences that makes the kids go on vacation to the point where parents are like, wow, you don't even really sometimes want to spend time with me, right? Because they have so much fun as they go into these places. But it's really, really important that the reason why those things work so well, when they do work well, is that you did a great job at the irrational components, in the emotional piece, in what's going on with that guest, or that that customer's kind of story of an interaction. I watched someone the other day, I guess had a bad experience at like a Dunkin' Donuts, and they go, I'm never the person that writes a letter, but I'm calling them today. And I thought, for a Dunkin' Donuts? Like, they had to take your experience to like such a place that the wheels fell off the wagon, because I mean, like, it's a Dunkin' Donut. But it really was, that's important, right? What somebody's coffee experience is in the morning, or taking the time to do that. So we can't minimize and assess that to a price point. We can't minimize it to just our grocery stores or other things. It's anything that we're out interacting with each other should come back. And even if it's maybe not the most pleasurable experience, somebody says, I was able to respond in a manner and in a way that it got resolution, and it doesn't leave it where we lose things like belonging, inclusion, voices being heard, as a result of our own behaviors getting in the way, because we're just too angry and we're not willing to listen and we're not willing to find solutions. We can't live in a world like that.
I think one thing that comes up when you mention the Dunkin' Donuts comment is that it's usually, if that's what happens, it's usually not the cup of coffee. There's a lot more happening that's led to the explosion of the cup of coffee. Um, you know,
Yeah, I was
and
gonna say this. I was gonna say the same thing because I often hear people say like, and I heard it the other day, and it triggered me because they were like, they weren't able to make the connection between DEI and hospitality. They were kind of like, well, this isn't, brain surgery. Like, we don't want to overthink it. And I'm like, actually, it is, because that experience that someone is having at these events or at destinations, there's a lot of things going on in the brain. There's a lot of things that the brain and the heart, as Lynnette, you explained so eloquently earlier, that we can't dismiss, that when somebody comes to work, that they don't have previous experiences and things on their mind. And that's why we can't, forget that people want to be seen. I'm not a robot just at service, or I'm not just representative of this company. I'm a whole person, and I've got my son who's graduating in 6 months, and he's going to be 18 in 9 months. And oh my goodness, and he's out there driving, he's at school. And then now I have to face in front of a customer and say, how can I help you? While all these things are processing in my brain. So it may not be brain surgery, but we do have to understand the complexities of, what the brain is going through while people show up, and how that, impacts how they show up authentically in spaces.
well said. Well said. I'm looking at the time and we have a few more minutes left. What is one takeaway? We've talked a lot, about different ways to think, addressed traumas and triggers, from a lot of different lenses. What's one takeaway, an actionable takeaway that you have for our audience here and our audience that will be listening today on anything that kind of just the first thing that resonates with you, Lynnette?
I definitely think dig into the values and see it from these layers. As if I'm a leader in an organization, what's my personal value set? Even though I know I've signed on for this mission, it's like a nice banner on the wall, we might high five it, we see them. And really driving that alignment. How do my behaviors support what I've signed up for, but just guide me as an individual each and every day? And a lot of times listening for it from the others that you lead or work with, and your guests. A lot of times you can hear it in their statements and you don't realize you're hearing the value, right? So if someone comes in and they're like, oh, having this, great service experience just gave me, it gave me so much care. I felt cared for. Someone has also right then told you a value that's important to them, which is care. They're often usually a caretaker and other things. So learning how to listen for those types of words, I think help us make really great business decisions a lot of times, whether it's the audience of who we're servicing, but also take great care of your teams that you're leading. So knowing your own personal value set, like I said, my top 5 are joy, kindness, freedom, care, and compassion. So I can work with others and share with them what does compassion look like for me. To me, compassion could be candid feedback. And saying, I won't withhold that from you, right? Brene Brown says to be clear is kind, to be unclear is unkind. So I kind of can use that quote and share with people, hey, while you might not like the feedback I give you, I will always do it with care and intention and compassion. But often really the most is for your employees, right? We're still in a world where people have to justify why they would like a personal day off that they have earned. But I think back to like our graduation season in the hotel, and like I would be the type of person to be like, hey, I know we got rooms to clean, but there's housekeepers and they're first generation kids. Like, please make sure they can. I don't care. How do we figure out a half a day and somebody else? And maybe we can improve the overtime a little bit here, because that experience for them is out of this world, right? It really is out of this world. And so, how do we kind of let values guide our business decisions? And you will get the ROI. That's mine.
Thank you. So,
yeah, I think I'll tie it back to the title. When we talk about the other baggage that we bring, I think it's key to reframe how we look at baggage. We can think of it as only negative. We can look at it as each person has a suitcase and a story that they bring. They've packed their bag differently, and using it as an analogy to, again, personally reflect and be socially aware, of what are people carrying when they come into spaces, and who are they, and what value do they bring? So it's a lot about reframing, changing the narrative, and taking that moment to breathe so that you can identify that as people begin to open up their baggage and be curious about what they have in it, and what stories you can learn, and what experiences, and how you can live vicariously through someone. And that creates just a shared experience, and we find out that we have more in common than we do different.
Like that. Now, for me, two things resonate. I know I said one, but I'm going to kind of put it into two. One is grace, providing and offering people grace, and offering yourself grace, whatever that looks like for you. Sometimes it's hard to remember that, and that then allows for space for, I think, for what both of you have said today. And the other that I'm also going to practice, because I've said it, is actively asking, how are you? And actively listening. And that is with everyone and everywhere as I can. So those are two things that I'll be working on, and maybe I can offer it up as well to our listeners today to also try out. So you have at least 3 or 4 things that we can work with as we end our session today. I want to thank you both, Lynnette Phillips, Zoe Moore, for being here today and offering your perspectives, your vulnerabilities, and having this discussion with us today. We have one session, the next session that's coming up, called How Destination Cleveland Leveraged MMGY's Global Black Travel Program and Partnership. It's in partnership with Black Travel Alliance. And again, thank you all for being here today, and have a wonderful rest of your day wherever you are in the world. Take care.